I was 36 the Christmas my world split in two. I can still hear the sound of wrapping paper, tearing laughter rising like smoke, the clinking of glasses around my in-laws' living room. I was seated on the couch, wearing the red sweater my husband had bought me years earlier, when our marriage still felt like home. My name is Claire, and I used to believe that if I gave enough of myself, my patience, my forgiveness, my silence, then love would always find its way back. But what I learned that winter morning is that sometimes love is just another word for betrayal waiting to bloom. Aaron and I had been married for 9 years. We met when I was still working nights at the bookstore near campus. He walked in smelling of motor oil, holding a broken car manual and asking for help. I was tired and distracted, but he smiled at me like I was the only person who could make sense of his mess. That smile, that earnestness, it disarmed me. We started dating soon after, and I thought I had found a man who would protect me from the sharpness of the world. I was wrong. The cracks began small, like hairline fractures in glass. Aaron's family never truly welcomed me. They tolerated me at best. His mother always looked at me with polite dismissal, her lips pressing into a thin smile that never reached her eyes. His father remained quiet, but his silence was its own condemnation. To them, I was never quite enough. Not rich enough, not sophisticated enough, not the right match for their golden son. I told myself it didn't matter. Aaron loved me, and love was enough, or so I thought. But as years passed, I realized Aaron was not immune to their influence. Their whispers became his words, their judgments seeped into his silences. At first, it was subtle comments about how other husbands earned more, how other wives dressed differently. Then it grew louder. Arguments about children, about my career, about who I was, compared to who they thought I should be. I carried those wounds quietly, patching them over with the fabric of endurance. The Christmas before everything ended, I felt the distance widening like a canyon. Aaron worked later, stayed out longer, his phone buzzing at odd hours with messages he wouldn't explain. When I asked, he brushed me off. "Work," he said. "Don't be paranoid." I wanted to believe him, so I did, until belief began to taste like poison. That morning, surrounded by his family, I held a cup of lukewarm coffee and tried to steady my breath. Children squealed with delight as they opened their presents. His mother handed out envelopes with crisp bills tucked inside. His sister laughed too loudly at her own jokes. And Aaron, my husband, approached me with a neatly wrapped box. For a fleeting second, my heart softened. Maybe this was the moment he'd remind me of us. Maybe he'd prove that, despite everything, we still had a thread binding us together. But when I tore away the wrapping and lifted the lid, my breath caught. Inside was not jewelry, not a photograph, not anything chosen with love. It was a manila envelope. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. Divorce papers. His family erupted in laughter, clapping as if this humiliation was a long-awaited punchline. His mother's eyes gleamed with vindication. His sister smirked triumphantly, and Aaron stood there, arms crossed, watching me break. They had orchestrated this moment, planned it like some cruel theater, where I was both the villain and the fool. I sat frozen, the papers heavy in my hands, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear their voices. The room blurred with heat and shame. I felt exposed, stripped of dignity, reduced to nothing more than the butt of their cruel joke. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that I had my own gift prepared. Because weeks before Christmas, I had already discovered the truth. I knew about the late-night calls, I knew about the woman from his office, I knew about the hotel receipts and the lies he told without blinking. I had gathered every message, every photograph, every piece of evidence, and I had wrapped it up carefully, waiting for the perfect moment. As their laughter echoed, I felt the weight of my revenge resting in my bag. My humiliation burned, but beneath it flickered something stronger, quiet determination. They thought I was broken. They thought I was cornered. But I was about to show them that I wasn't invisible and I wasn't weak. I sat there holding those divorce papers, my pulse pounding so hard it felt like it rattled the room. Their laughter still rang in my ears, cruel and shrill, as if I was nothing more than the punchline to a family joke years in the making. Aaron's sister actually clapped her bracelets, jangling like bells on a mockery parade. His mother leaned back smugly, as though my humiliation was her Christmas wish finally granted. But as they smiled at my ruin, I lowered the envelope into my lap and steadied my breath. Because I hadn't walked into this house empty-handed. I had come prepared. For weeks before Christmas, my instincts had screamed that something was wrong. The late nights, the work trips that didn't add up, the shift in his gaze when his phone lit up with a name he wouldn't show me. I wasn't stupid. Women know when their husband's love has turned into performance. So I did what love-drunk Claire would never have imagined doing years earlier. I watched. I listened. I collected. I kept screenshots of the messages he thought he'd hidden. I noted the dates and times he was at the shop, but wasn't. I hired a private investigator who handed me photos so damning they made me sick. Aaron and his little secret weren't even discreet. Hotel rooms, bars, a hand pressed into the small of her back as they walked out of restaurants I'd once begged him to take me to. I carried that knowledge like a stone in my chest. Heavy, cold, but also sharp enough to become a weapon if I needed it. And on Christmas morning, surrounded by his family's smirks, I knew it was time. I placed the divorce papers gently on the coffee table as though they were just another discarded gift box. Then without a word, I reached into my bag. The room quieted curiosity slicing through the laughter. I pulled out a small velvet box tied with a gold ribbon. My hands didn't shake as I set it in Aaron's lap. "Merry Christmas," I said, my voice steady in a way I hadn't heard in years. He frowned, clearly unprepared for me to respond. His fingers worked at the ribbon. The paper peeled back. He opened the lid and his face drained of color. Inside was not jewelry, not a token of love, but photographs. Him and her. Arms entangled, lips pressed, dates scrawled neatly on the backs in my handwriting. Beside them, a USB drive sat waiting. "What is this?" His voice cracked, but I didn't answer. Instead, I stood smoothing the wrinkles of my sweater and turned slowly to face every pair of eyes in that living room. "Since you all wanted a show," I said softly, "let's not leave the audience unsatisfied." Gasps broke through the silence as I began to speak. I told them about the investigator, the texts, the calls at 2 a.m. when he claimed to be stuck at work. I described the receipts from hotels that weren't even discreetly chosen. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. My words were even measured, deliberate. Each sentence a nail hammered into the coffin of their illusion. His mother's smirk collapsed, first sliding into horror as she looked at her son. His sister stopped clapping her bracelet, suddenly too loud in the stillness. And Aaron, my husband, the man who had thought humiliating me in front of his family would end with my silence, sat frozen, his hands gripping the box like it might explode. I bent forward, retrieved the envelope of divorce papers he had given me, and laid it neatly beside the evidence I had just delivered. "You wanted to serve me," I said, "but I came prepared to serve you." The silence was deafening. I could feel every heartbeat in that room, quick and panicked. Children shifted uncomfortably. His father cleared his throat but didn't speak. And then I gave them the last gift, the truth. "I may not have been the wife you wanted for your son," I said, sweeping my gaze across the family who had judged me since the day I entered their lives. "But I was loyal. I was faithful." And this, I gestured toward Aaron. His face pale and wet with sweat, is who you raised. This is the man you celebrated. No one moved, so I straightened my shoulders, picked up my coat, and said, "I'll see you in court." I walked out with my head high, leaving them in the ruins of their laughter. The cold December air hit my face as I stepped out of that house, but it didn't sting. It revived me. For the first time in years, I felt taller. Behind me, the once boisterous living room was silent, no more laughter, no more smug smiles. I could almost imagine them frozen in place, replaying my words over and over. The weight of their complicity hung heavy, but it was no longer mine to carry. I drove away without looking back, the divorce papers and photographs left like landmines in their living room. My hands gripped the wheel steady, while my heart raced with a cocktail of grief and vindication. The tears didn't come right away. They waited until I reached my parents' driveway, where the porch light glowed like a quiet welcome. When my mother opened the door, her face softened into the kind of concern only mothers can wear. She didn't ask questions at first. She simply pulled me into her arms, and I collapsed against her shoulder. For so long, I had hidden the cracks in my marriage, smiling at dinners, deflecting questions, pretending we were fine. But in her embrace, The truth spilled out, the betrayal, the humiliation, the years of silence and doubt. My father, stoic as ever, sat across from me at the kitchen table once I calmed down. He didn't speak much, but the anger in his eyes was enough. I realized then how starved I had been for anyone to take my side without hesitation. That night, I slept in my childhood room, surrounded by relics of simpler days, and for the first time in years, I dreamed without nightmares. The weeks that followed were both brutal and liberating. Aaron tried calling, first to scream, then to plead. I let every call go to voicemail. He left messages full of contradictions, rage tangled with regret. He begged me not to expose him publicly, claiming it would ruin his career. He promised it was over with the other woman, that he'd been manipulated, that he still loved me. But the voice I once longed to hear now sounded hollow, stripped of its power. His family, the same people who had clapped at my humiliation, stayed silent. Not one apology, not one acknowledgement. I didn't expect it. Their pride was a fortress, and I had stormed it too thoroughly for them to ever forgive me for showing the world their golden boy's cracks. Instead, I poured my energy into building my case. My lawyer was impressed by the meticulous evidence I had gathered. The USB drive, the receipts, the screenshots, they painted a picture so undeniable that Aaron had little room to maneuver. In mediation, he tried to play the victim, accusing me of ambushing him, of embarrassing his family. My lawyer leaned forward and said evenly, "Your client embarrassed himself." I almost smiled. But it wasn't about winning a courtroom battle. It was about reclaiming the years I had lost, the dignity stripped from me in whispers and jokes. Each meeting, each signed document, each step closer to freedom felt like breathing deeper. Still, nights were hard. I would lie awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love had soured so completely. I replayed the early days, his smile in the bookstore, our road trips, the promises we whispered under covers. I grieved those memories as if they belonged to someone else, because in a way they did. The woman who had believed in them was gone. I had shed her like old skin the moment I walked out of that house on Christmas Day. And then came the moment of truth, the court hearing. Aaron sat across the room, eyes downcast. His once proud posture slumped. The judge reviewed the evidence, the timelines, the details. When the decree was finalized, it felt less like an ending and more like a rebirth. Papers stamped, signatures sealed. I was no longer his wife. I was myself again. Afterward, I stepped outside into the crisp spring air. The world felt brighter, sharper, alive in ways I hadn't noticed before. I realized that revenge hadn't been the evidence I dropped in his lap, or the humiliation I mirrored back at him. The real revenge was survival. It was the fact that I was standing there whole while his life unraveled piece by piece. Word spread as it always does. People learned about the affair, about the Christmas spectacle, about the divorce. His reputation took the hit he had feared, not because I shouted it from rooftops, but because truth has a way of echoing louder than lies. Mira, the woman he thought would replace me, left him soon after, unwilling to stand in the wreckage. Karma had done its work quietly and thoroughly. I didn't dance on his ruins. I didn't need to. My victory was quieter, deeper. It was in the mornings I woke up without dread. In the laughter I rediscovered with friends. In the stories I began to tell, not of pain, but of resilience. And yet the memory of that Christmas will never leave me. Not the humiliation, not the laughter, not the sting of betrayal. But when I think of it now, I don't feel broken. I feel powerful. Because they thought they buried me under shame, but I grew from it instead. Months passed, and life began to take on a new rhythm, one I hadn't realized I was capable of creating. I moved into a small apartment downtown. Nothing extravagant, but it had wide windows that spilled sunlight across the floor every morning. I filled it with plants, stacks of books, and little reminders that the space belonged entirely to me. No judgmental glances from in-laws, no footsteps I had to brace myself against, just peace. But peace didn't mean forgetting. There were nights when memories rose, uninvited, sharp as broken glass. I would see Aaron's smirk, hear his sisters clapping, replay the sound of their laughter after he handed me divorce papers wrapped like a gift. It would twist in my chest, threatening to undo me. Yet every time I reminded myself, I walked out, and I am still standing. Their cruelty did not end me, it birthed me into someone stronger. Work helped anchor me. I returned to teaching, and in those classrooms I found a sense of purpose again. My students didn't know my story, but they knew I saw them. I could tell when a quiet girl carried too much on her shoulders, when a boy's sarcasm was just a mask for pain. I noticed because I knew what it was like to go unseen. In noticing them, I found healing for myself. Meanwhile, Aaron's world unraveled. Word spread about his affair and the Christmas spectacle. Friends he once bragged to kept their distance. Even his own father, who had sat silently through that day, was said to have told him he'd brought shame to the family name. His career, once steady, began to falter. Clients pulled away wary of the scandal, and Mira, the woman he had betrayed me with, left him too. Apparently, she hadn't signed up for damaged goods once the shine wore off. I didn't gloat, though. A part of me savored the irony. Karma didn't need me to lift a finger. It worked silently, stripping away every illusion he had built. All I had to do was continue living. And I did. Slowly, I started to laugh again. I went to dinners with friends I had lost touch with. I traveled alone for the first time, standing on cliffs overlooking the ocean, breathing in the salt air, as if it were proof that I had survived. I even allowed myself to imagine love again. Not immediately, not recklessly, but as a possibility, a gentle horizon I could one day walk toward. But perhaps the most important part of my healing came in reflection. I began to write journaling not just about the pain, but about the lessons hidden inside it. I wrote about the danger of mistaking endurance for love, about the quiet violence of being erased in your own marriage, about how betrayal doesn't always come in storms, it can arrive wrapped in ribbon disguised as a gift. And people listened. I started sharing small pieces online, and women wrote back. They told me my words echoed their own stories of being mocked, dismissed, unseen. One message simply said, "Thank you for reminding me I deserve better." That more than any courtroom victory felt like triumph. My pain had not been wasted. It had become a lantern. Still, there was one final encounter I hadn't anticipated. Nearly a year after the divorce, I ran into Aaron in the grocery store. He looked thinner, older, his once confident stride reduced to a shuffle. He spotted me by the produce aisle, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then he tried to smile, a weak, faltering curve of his lips. "I'm sorry," he murmured, voice hoarse, eyes glassy. I studied him, the man who had once held my heart carelessly, who had humiliated me so publicly, who had underestimated my strength. For a brief flicker I pitied him. But then I remembered the sound of his laughter blending with his family's as I sat with divorce papers in my lap. "You're sorry," I said evenly, "but I'm free." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing among the apples and oranges, a man diminished by his own choices. That night I sat by my window, the city lights glowing below, and I felt something settle in me. Closure. Not because he apologized, but because I no longer needed him to. I had given myself the ending I deserved. The anniversary of that Christmas arrived quietly, and I braced myself for the weight of it. Instead of sorrow, though, I felt something else, an almost sacred calm. A year earlier, I had been reduced to a spectacle, mocked in front of a family who reveled in my pain. Now I was standing in my own kitchen, baking cookies for my students, humming to music that filled the walls of an apartment that was wholly mine. I didn't feel erased anymore. I felt present. But anniversaries have a way of drawing shadows. A few days before Christmas, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable. Aaron's. I almost tossed it without opening, but curiosity tugged at me. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, words written in uneven strokes. He wrote that he was sorry, that his life had fallen apart, that he had lost not just me, but also the respect of his colleagues, the trust of his friends, the pedestal his family once placed him on. He admitted he had thought humiliating me would give him control, but instead it destroyed him. The last line read, "If you ever wonder if I see you now, I do. Too late, but I do." I stared at the letter for a long time. Once those words would have been everything I had ached to hear. But now they were just paper. They didn't undo the cruelty, the laughter, the betrayal. They didn't change the fact that I had found my strength not because of him, but in spite of him. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of what I had endured and how far I had come. That Christmas, I spent the evening with friends who had become like chosen family. We cooked together, shared stories, and toasted to new beginnings. I laughed real, unguarded laughter that bubbled up from a place untouched by fear or shame. And as the night wound down, one of them asked me what I wanted for the future. I thought about it for a moment, then said, I want to keep choosing myself, every day, in big ways and small ones, because that was the lesson life had carved into me. Love is meaningless without respect. Endurance is not devotion when it erases who you are. And invisibility, no matter how gilded with gifts and traditions, kills more quietly than cruelty. My story isn't just about betrayal, it's about survival. It's about reclaiming my place in the world after being told I didn't matter. It's about standing up in the ruins of what someone tried to destroy and saying, I am still here. So if you're listening to me now, maybe you've been where I was. Maybe you've felt the sting of being mocked, the ache of being overlooked, the humiliation of being betrayed in the very place you thought you were safe. I want you to know this: you are not invisible. You are not disposable. And you are not defined by the people who failed to see your worth. Walk away if you must. Rebuild if you can. Choose yourself again and again until the echoes of their laughter no longer matter. Because one day you'll find yourself standing in the light of your own life, realizing you didn't just survive, you rose. If my story resonated with you, I ask you to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below if you've ever felt unseen and found the courage to reclaim your voice. Your story matters here. And together, we remind the world that invisibility is never the end, it's the beginning of becoming visible again.